So, in this session, I'm going to introduce you to the tool that I use almost every single day that helps me and guides me as I'm dealing with negative feelings and thought patterns. And I'm going to start with an example of something that I'm going through. It's fairly benign, but it does require me to tell you a little bit of the story so that you can relate to how complicated our thoughts and feelings actually are. So I will keep it as short as possible, a couple of minutes, but it does require a backstory. And then I'll go into what the thought model is. So if you're watching this again, you can skip the story and go right into my explanation of how I break down my thoughts and feelings. But first, I have to explain how I have come to have the thoughts and feelings that I have. About 5 years ago, I was in Mexico and got a really bad bug of E. coli. Really bad food poisoning is how it manifested. And I was blowing out both sides of my body and so sick. And when I got home, they had advised me to take an antibiotic. But the first one they advised me to was just some generic antibiotic. And I refused to take it because I just felt like I wanted my body to be able to bring this bug into balance. But the bug turned out to be pretty nasty. And within a month of getting home and kind of feeling better, I ended up being hospitalized because I spiked a fever of 105 degrees and had a lot of pain, and I was not doing well. And I'm married to a doctor. And so in our home, even though we both share beliefs about, self-care and healing and the power of nutrition and the power of good sleep and exercise, he kind of moves quickly into treatments. So he was pushing all along for me to take an antibiotic, and I refused. Ultimately, when they wanted to put me on the antibiotic, I demanded, which I had the right to do, that they culture the my urine or blood or whatever they were culturing, and so that they knew which antibiotic specifically to prescribe. And I'm glad that I did, because the first three that they were telling me to take were not appropriate. In the end, I ended up hospitalized and on IV antibiotics for 2 weeks, and my infection did seem to clear up. The problem was that there's a payoff with the antibiotics, and it really knocked my gut flora out of whack. One factor that I cannot deny is that I was drinking during this time. And so I was not helping myself with self care and healing. And so that always makes me look back and think, could I have done more and avoided the antibiotic? But basically, after I finished the course of antibiotics and got out of the hospital, for the next 8 to 10 months, I was dealing with a lot of gut issues. So what that looked like was I had major discomfort and bloating. I felt like my torso was in a blood pressure cuff, and I just wanted to pop it. I ended up having SIBO, SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And it took me a long time to care for that. Now, of course, I was drinking, so it might not have taken as long, and I have to admit that. But ultimately, I had to go on an elimination diet and do a lot of supplements, and it was just not fun. So I don't have great feelings about the fact that I took the antibiotic. I still have this belief that if I would have just stuck it out, I would have been fine. My husband believes that if I hadn't taken the antibiotic, I would have died. Okay, so fast forward to now. Since I quit drinking, I've been having bladder issues. It's called interstitial cystitis. Not sure I'm saying that right, but whatever. And ever since I've quit drinking alcohol, I have symptoms of what would be like the beginning of a bladder infection. I just feel irritated and uncomfortable, and a lot of times I feel like I have to go to the bathroom, and sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't. And I've really tried to manage these symptoms on my own. I recognize that that is interstitial cystitis is a chronic condition. And ultimately, I don't want to use medications to correct that. I feel like probably it's damage that I did from always having alcohol in my bladder. And so I've tried to correct that. I've given up my coffee. I avoid sugar. I eat really healthy. When I'm having a lot of symptoms, I drink a lot of water. I drink a lot of tea. So I'm really trying. And thus far, it's been a good year that I've been dealing with this, but my symptoms have been manageable. Well, 2 months ago, I one day all of a sudden, just like a wall. And I went, listened to my body, and I laid down right in the middle of the afternoon. God forbid we take naps. But anyway, that was me. I went and laid down, and within an hour, I had a really high fever. And my husband came home and he said, okay, whatever that E. coli infection was in your bladder from years ago, clearly that's back, and wanted me immediately to get on the antibiotic. And I refused. I said no. But the next day I woke up and I was fine. And that was 2 months ago. I've continued to have the lingering, annoying symptoms of the interstitial cystitis, but I've been managing it, again, cutting coffee, drinking water, self-care, all of that, trying to stay calm. Anxiety really jacks it up. But then last week, I was about 3 days in, I had this flank pain. And I was thinking about that. And it feels like, if you work out with heavy weights and you do side bends or deadlifts, you get that really uncomfortable sensation. And yeah, so I was thinking about that. And then 3 days in, I realized, oh, wait, you haven't been to the gym and there have been no heavy weights in this story. Like, you have flank pain. I didn't have a fever. So I told my husband about it, and he demanded once again that I get he's a doctor. I do want to say he's not my doctor. He's my husband. So I have not been told, differently by a doctor, but he's in communication with his friends. He wants me to get a culture. They did. Indeed, it is this E. coli. So this weekend, I am dealing with huge amounts of panic and anxiety because I don't want to take the antibiotic if I don't need to. And I think that I am okay. I think that my body can handle this. I'm willing to be sick. We have this, when I say I'm willing to be sick, what I'm speaking of is we have this belief in our society, and I bought into it for 30 years, where if we get a cold, we take cold medicine so that we don't have to stop. We don't have to rest. We don't have to call in sick, and COVID has changed a lot of that. If you feel sick, stay home. But really, I was raised in an environment that if there's a pill that can put you back on the road, you need to do that. And it doesn't matter what caused the problem. You just treat the symptoms and move on. And then we wonder why, 30 years of that behavior, our shit starts breaking down. So I'm really trying to avoid that. And I feel good and healthy about that. But needless to say, this weekend, I'm kind of really close to tears, and I'm really upset because now my husband's telling me that I need to take a very specific antibiotic, which is kind of a nuclear bomb. And he's telling me if I don't take it, I could die. And, I'm freaking out. So let me pause the story and show you the intentional thought models and what those look like, and then how I'm using them. So there are 5 components to our thought models, and you can download the file below this video and follow along. I've just screenshotted so you can see also in this video, but there are 5 components: circumstance, feelings, thoughts, the actions you're taking because of those feelings and thoughts, and then the results. The circumstance is always neutral. So you're not using emotional words to describe that. And it's something that everybody, from the spouse you're fighting with to the dog sitting beneath you, it's something that everybody would agree on. It's just simple, basic, and forward. And then your feelings and your thoughts. This is where I cue myself to use the thought model, because usually it's my feelings that I'm identifying as the problem first. Sometimes it is a thought. So you can start with the thought, and then figure out what you're feeling, or you can start with the feeling and figure out what the underlying thought is. But either way, you're going to use negative emotions and negative thinking to cue this tool for you. And the feelings are, you want to just boil it down to one word. I have a feeling list. Let me put that up real fast. A feeling list is important because it allows you to really dig in beneath your words. There are six feelings that are kind of the primary feelings. And, in psychology, there's also, I've seen there's eight basic feelings. It doesn't matter. It basically just cues you to think deeper. In this thought model, I've included six base emotions: fear, sadness, anger, happiness, disgust, and surprised. And then beneath each are the kind of secondary feelings that arise. Like just looking at fear, you might feel scared, it might be anxious, insecure, submissive, rejected, or humiliated. And then the tertiary, I don't know how to say that, tertiary emotions follow. And that just breaks it down a little bit more. So as you get more confident using this tool, you won't need to refer to the list. I don't usually, but this list can help you in the beginning really consider what emotions you're feeling so you can really dial in, and that helps you then move into the thought and identify the thought. So once you identify your feeling, then the thought, a lot of times for me, the first thing I come to is a question. I'm asking a question. Do I do this? Should I do that? And what you want to do for the thought is turn it into a statement. So answer the question. If I take this antibiotic, will I die? So the thought is, I could die if I take the antibiotic, if that makes sense. When you're figuring out what the actions and results are, you want to make sure that the actions, it's not necessarily what's happening because of the way you're thinking and feeling, but what you're saying and doing and how you're acting because you feel and think a certain way. So as you look at what you're putting in each line, notice that if you have an action down in your result line, then move that up to action and then play forward and figure out what the result of those actions are. And this takes time, and it's not necessarily something that you have to get perfect, but it really does help to break down how the actions are creating the result. And it's really helpful to differentiate between those two things. With really complicated situations, as the one I've kind of described, where there's past things going on and fears and a component with my spouse and conflict there, you're going to want to do more than one thought model. So let's look. I made 3 thought models for this situation, and we'll go through the first one. We'll start with the past. So, when you do thought models, you'll write down the unintentional thought model. That's what's happening before you apply emotional intelligence and work to change your thoughts and feelings and thus actions and results. Um, and the circumstance is always the same in both. So for this circumstance, I am saying that I had pyelonephritis, which is the kidney infection that resulted from the food poisoning 5 years ago, and I ended up in the hospital. Everybody can agree on that. That happened. Currently, because of that 5 year ago thing, I'm feeling kind of traumatized. And my thought is that I can't trust the medical system because I went in and I took the antibiotic, even though I didn't really think I needed to. I get it. 105-degree temperature. That would be, there's a lot of room for difference of opinion there, but that is how I felt. I still feel like, the 8 to 10 months that I suffered because of the antibiotics might have been avoided if I'd have just rode the fever out. So my thought is that I can't trust the medical system because they're just going to give me a drug. The actions that I take then is that I argue with my husband, who's not in agreement with me. And more importantly, I'm refusing the antibiotic for this infection. I don't want to take it. And the result is that I am experiencing a lot of conflict, both internal and with my spouse, and I have a lot of uneasiness and fear. When I think about it, how do I want to think and feel? Well, I'd like to feel acceptance of the past. I had pyelonephritis and I ended up in the hospital. That happened 5 years ago. The only way for me to feel acceptance for that is to tell myself I made the best decision that I could at the time, which I did. I was really sick. I didn't have a lot of bandwidth to handle what was coming at me in terms of medical advice, especially when it's coming from my spouse, who I love and trust. So, the action from the thought that I made the best decision I could at the time is I can acknowledge that there were pros and cons of taking that antibiotic. Good things happened, I got better faster, and bad things happened. I didn't recover overnight. And I can also act and evaluate the current situation independently. It's not necessarily going to be a repeat decision. And I want to untangle those cords of connection where, because of the past, I want to replay the future. No, I want to be independent and evaluate this. There's a lot of different factors including the fact that I'm not drinking and that I learned from the past, all of that happened. And so I know that just taking the antibiotic isn't going to solve everything. And the result of all of that is that I do understand that both options, taking the antibiotic and not taking the antibiotic, have pros and cons. And I can use those experiences to make good decisions now. So let's look at the thought model for the current situation. The circumstance is that I have symptoms of a kidney infection and I am feeling scared. The thought is that letting this go and not taking the antibiotic could lead to kidney damage and, according to my husband, sudden and swift death. Okay, so the actions that I'm taking because I'm scared is I just worrying. I'm just obsessing over it. I'm overthinking. I'm microanalyzing all my symptoms. I'm not really taking care of myself. And the result is that I'm feeling more anxious. I'm not able to sleep because I'm worried. And that is actually working against me. If I do hope to avoid the antibiotic, I need to sleep and I need to rest. And I'm also overreacting to everyone and everything, not just my husband, but I'm short with my kids. I don't feel like I have a bandwidth that I can, make a good meal. And all of these things just collude together and life's not going well. So, how do I want to feel? I'd like to feel calm. I have symptoms of a kidney infection. The thought that would make me feel calm is I trust my body to inform my behavior. That's a big one. Can I trust myself? Well, I think I can. And I'm comfortable choosing that thought. I trust my body to tell me if I'm getting sicker. So the action that I'm taking is that I went ahead and filled the antibiotic, but I'm not going to take it yet. I'm just going to have it. I'm going to monitor my symptoms. I'm going to rest and self care. And the result is that I feel much more at peace. I know I can take that antibiotic if I develop a fever or if the flank pain gets worse. And I feel confident in every decision I make. Every little decision, from taking a nap to drinking more water, makes me feel like I'm taking care of myself and that I got this. And that is how I want to feel. So, the last thing to deal with is my feelings about my spouse and his opinion. And not just his opinion, because he represents the medical system. So I've identified the circumstance as I have been advised to take an antibiotic for pyelonephritis. And the way I've been feeling about that, again, is panic. And the thought into that panic is that I can't trust medical advice. No one's got my back. No one really knows what I need. No one knows what's going to happen. And so the actions I take, honestly, I've been close to tears for days. I'm obsessing. I'm feeling anxious. And I'm also feeling like I'm a problem. I'm the problem patient. My husband is viewing me as a pain in the ass who won't take her medicine. And I like being a good girl. I like people pleasing a little bit. So that's making me feel even worse. And the result is that I'm fighting with my husband, not just about this, but about anything. We're kind of nitpicking. I don't feel relaxed. And I have this overwhelming sense and anger that the system is rigged against me. So I feel like a victim instead of a survivor. And how do I want to feel? Well, I want to feel cautious. The circumstances, I've been advised to take the antibiotic. The thought that I want to have is I'm lucky to have health care. I'm lucky to have options. I'm lucky to have the ability to make a decision for myself and have whatever I need to back me up on that decision. So the action again is that I fill the antibiotic and I set the parameters for when I take it. And the result is I feel prepared. I don't feel like a victim. I feel like a survivor. And I feel confident while I wait and see. We'll see. When I first started using the thought models, I used them with my coach. It is it takes a lot of practice to be able to untangle the feeling from the thought and the actions from the result. It takes a lot of practice just to identify a circumstance as neutral, but as we move through recovery, it's very important for us to remember that the way we feel is always the result of our own thought processes. My husband is not making me feel panicked. My thoughts are making me feel panic. And so understanding that I have the ability to change those thoughts. Now, it doesn't happen over, I can't just like insert one and delete code, you know what I'm saying? But every time I catch myself feeling panicked, anxious, scared, I remember that I have a choice in what I'm thinking. And so it's you interrupt the thought process, you choose a new thought process, and you rinse and you repeat. And every time you catch yourself going down that spiral of panic, you just remember that you don't have to and you pull out of it. And that pulling out of it gets easier and quicker each time, but it takes a lot of practice. So I encourage you to sit down with these thought models. And as you saw me do, one situation especially early on, might have 3, 4, 5 different thought models or more. There's no limit, but it's very important to untangle the cords of the past and future projections and feelings about your spouse and feelings about um, job and kids and all of these things and just narrow it down. And the more you can distill it down, the more you can get to the base and the more you can interrupt and slowly begin to create a new reality for yourself. Just remember, as we've talked in other sessions, that the way you feel is your responsibility. And when you're the problem, you're also the solution. So nobody makes you feel a certain way. No situation makes you feel a certain way. Your thoughts make you feel a certain way. And when you take control of that and do the work to untangle the cords and insert the way you do want to feel, life gets really peaceful and powerful. So don't be afraid to reach out to me if you're having trouble with a thought model. Email it to me, or we can talk on the phone or on a group call, so that you can really get used to using this model so that it can work for you just like that.